All right, next we have the final rebellion. Um, at the end of the millennial period, Satan is released from the bottomless pit. During this 1,000 years, he was chained in the bottomless pit, so he couldn't be causing us mischief. He's released, and he is going to go to the people in the normal natural bodies who populated the millennial kingdom, and he is going to try to lead one final rebellion against God. And believe it or not, even though the people in the millennial kingdom had been living under the direct rule and reign of Christ, they could actually see him. He'd be sitting on his throne in Jerusalem, ruling the world, and the justice system will be perfect. The conditions will be awesome, yet people will still turn on Christ, turn on Christ, and they'll turn and take sides with the devil, and the rebellion will be put down, shall we say. So that's the final rebellion. And then the next event, I want to turn to the scripture in this one. The next event is called the Great White Throne Judgment. And let me pop over to my Bible here. Now, the classic text for this is in the book of Revelation, of course, chapter 20. And we're going to start about verse 15, I believe. 11. Okay. There is... Okay, so this is what I would call the classic text on the Great White Throne. Okay, what is the Great White Throne? Remember the Bema Seat, the judgment seat of Christ, where the believer's works were evaluated to see what kind of reward each believer will get. So at the Bema Seat for the Christians, the evaluation or the judgment was about, okay, how big is your reward? At the Great White Throne, this is only for the unsaved, those who rejected Christ. The issue here is, how bad will your eternity be? Because there are degrees of punishment. It would be totally unfair. God would be unjust to give the nice lady down the street who didn't receive Jesus, but was basically what we would call a nice person, to give her the same punishment as he gives to Adolf Hitler. You could claim that God is unjust, and he would be if that were the case, but that's not the way it works. So here's how this works. John is the writer, and he says, "Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them." Because this is the uncreation of the earth, of the universe, actually. From that second part of verse 11, from his presence, earth and sky fled away. There was no place found for them. Words mean something. That is the uncreation of this current universe. Verse 12. And then I saw the dead, great and small, stand before the throne, and the books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. Okay, so let's just pause here for a second. What are the books? Everyone is born with this intuitive sense that God keeps records. Because if you've ever talked to somebody who is not a Christian and you ask them, hey, how do you get to heaven? And they would say, well, I think my good works outweigh my bad works, and the scale will balance in my favor, and God will let me into heaven. They have this idea that salvation is by works and not by grace through faith, which is wrong. But they're not wrong about the idea that God keeps records, because it turns out that he does. Look what it says. I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were open. And then another book was opened, which is the book of life. Notice the next sentence. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. You see that? Judged according to what they had done. So they're not saved or lost by their works, but their works are what will determine how bad their eternity will be. They're going to go to the lake of fire because they rejected Jesus. The sin of unbelief is the only sin that's unforgivable. So that will be their sin. But how bad it will be for them in eternity will be determined by their works. Verse 13. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. I should say something about death and Hades just for a moment here. Hades is a place in the heart of the earth, so to speak. It's a spiritual place where the unsaved dead are awaiting final judgment. So if you go way back in the Old Testament and find people who rejected Christ, rejected the Messiah, he would be called in those days, and they ended up in Hades. It's a waiting place of torment. It's a synonym for hell, but it's not hell. Hell is a synonym for the lake of fire, but it's a waiting place of torment. So what we're seeing here is it's time for all these folks to be finally judged. They're in the waiting place of torment because they rejected God's Messiah. Now it's going to be, okay, you're going to the lake of fire. How bad is it going to be? So the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. So again, the judgment is based upon their works. What did they do with what they were given? Then death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So, too far. So that brings us then to this final event here, eternity, Revelation 21 and 22.